This is Monica Perez here with the seventh installment of this book, The Octopus, Secret Government and the Death of Danny Casolaro. And this has been a real page turner. It's not a huge book, but it is just packed with information. And as I've mentioned before, it just like skyrocketed in price as soon as I started reading it. So this may be your best bet to hear it, and you can listen while you're doing other stuff. Although this is going to be one of those things where you kind of maybe stop doing other stuff to listen to it. Anyway, we are on, it is by Kenn Thomas and Jim Keith. It's the revised edition. And we're just going through this chapter. This chapter just seems to go on forever because it's talking about the tentacles of the octopus. It's chapter 15. So we've just been taking off all the things that this octopus has its little tentacles in, the fingers in the pie, so to speak. And here's one that I remember hearing, but I didn't really know about it. But you may recognize the name, the Nugan Hand Bank. So here we are. And as hello, Angus, we are live and taking comments. So if you are listening live, we can maybe chat at the end. But you might just be listening to this. I post it every Saturday morning, a book chapter. I'm going to kind of do it forever, I think, on my podcast feed, The Monica Perez Show. So the next book I'm going to do is another Jim Keith book. I think it's called Mass Control, Mind Control. And that, my friends, is another page turner. Thank you very much for your birthday greetings. I got this new computer, so hopefully we'll never have any glitches again. And I got a super awesome bowling ball, which is in Monica Perez Show purple. It's called Deep Space, and I'm a little too excited about it. Anywho, okay, let us hit it with the Nugan Hand Bank. It didn't make, this is a quote. It didn't take many people to design the apparatus that would ensure the renewal of the lease for the Pine Gap installation near Alice Springs, Australia. After all, how could a democracy spit up a prime minister that could sack the security of the Western Alliance? What about tentacle operations of the octopus in Angola, Rhodesia, Zimbabwe, Mozambique, and Nigeria? Was this another case of wearing the right costume again, as in Chile? Politically correct assistance can cover the cover of the octopus for anything. Drug trafficking throughout Asia and the Middle East, arms dealing, and murder. But what happened to the money? Nearly $1 billion. So that, I believe, is a quote from Danny Casolaro's notes. So remember, Danny Casolaro was found murdered in a hotel room. I think he was lured to this area by someone who told him he had like the last piece of the puzzle. Now, Danny's murder went down as a suicide. However, the tendons on both of his wrists were cut through. So you could do that on one wrist, but you can't do it on two wrists. So obviously it was murder. And here, so he never wrote his book. So these are his notes. And I mean, he would have put them together in a book. And these guys, they're not really trying to write his book for him, but they're trying to reflect some of the things that he discovered in his work. But when he was killed, they took this folder that he would never, let out of his sight, apparently, an accordion folder, which had all the stuff in it. And, it's amazing that there wasn't a copy of it in a safe somewhere. Maybe there was. Anyway, all right, it goes on. The functions of the American Pine Gap installation in Australia include the receipt and transfer of information from spy satellites, the interception of phone calls from Europe, and the relaying of messages to the American nuclear submarine fleet. So remember the Five Eyes, the like echelon countries of the Five Eyes, where I believe UK, US, Canada, Australia, and South Africa, I believe. And so this could be part of that. And I just heard about Alice Springs in the news recently, like over the past couple of days. Anyway, all right. Gough Whitlam, the Labour Party candidate elected Prime Minister of Australia in 1972, was concerned about the cozy relationship between the ASIO, the Australian Security Intelligence Organization, and the CIA, and that ASIO had gone rogue. This, in turn, caused concern at the CIA. Ted Shackley is said to have gone, quote, paranoid and to have ordered a diminution of the information made available to them, while Ray Klein mentions, quote, a period of turbulence to do with Alice Springs. Fearing the curtailment of their Australian operations due to an approaching renewal date for the Pine Gap base, the CIA flexed their muscles and perhaps a couple of tentacles. On November 8th, 1975, a message of protest about Prime Minister Whitland was sent by Theodore Shackley to the head of ASIO. On May 11th, 1975, the CIA and OSS-connected Governor General of Australia, John Kerr, removed Whitlam as the head of government using constitutional pretext. According to CIA analyst Kevin Mulcahy, the CIA effort was headed by Milton Wonis, a friend of Nugan Hand Banks and possibly the CIA's Bernie Houghton. So they just removed the PM. They just removed him. And I think Australia might have thought it was some kind of democracy before that. If I'm not mistaken, I think this was a big deal. Let's see. After removing Whitlam from office, the Octopus was still not finished with Australia. At 4 a.m. on January 27th, 1980, the body of banker Frank Nugan was found in his Mercedes in Lithgow, Australia. He had died from a single gunshot from the .30 caliber rifle, which lay on the seat beside him. Nugan had been half owner with partner Michael John Hand in New Hand Limited, a group of banks founded in 1973, whose most visible subsidiary was Nugan Hand Bank in Australia, and whose name is usually applied to the enterprise. Hand had been a Green Beret in Vietnam, working closely with Air America, his commanding officer at the time being William Colby. Hand is also alleged by former associates to have been a drug runner. The deceased Frank Nugan had been a lawyer in Australia. Others connected to Nugan Hand included the president of the bank, U.S. Rear Admiral Earl P. Buddy Yates, the president of Nugan Hand, Inc., Hawaii, Brigadier General Edwin Black, and a number of other CIA officials. Black had served in the OSS, been a member of the National Security Council, and had commanded all U.S. troops in Thailand during the Vietnam War. The company also, my brother was in Thailand during the Vietnam War in the Air Force. The company also retained as a lawyer William Colby, former head of the CIA. Black had been Colby's OSS commander. Inquiries additionally showed that the majority of shareholders in New Hand Limited were connected to the CIA in some capacity. According to former CIA man Vincent Marchetti, the author of the classic The CIA and the Cult of Intelligence, I have that, speaking on Australian radio in October of 1980, Nugan Hand, quote, doesn't seem to be a CIA proprietary in the full sense of the word, that is, owned and controlled by the agency, nor does it seem to be a simple front organization. It seems to be more of an independent organization with former CIA people connected with it, and they're in business to make money. But because of their close personal relationship with the agency, they will do favors for the agency. This would include providing cover in some instances for operators. It would include laundering of money. It would include cutouts for any sort of highly clandestine activity the agency is involved in, but does not want to be any way directly connected with. When these organizations cooperate with the agency uses its influence, both directly with the government and indirectly through other proprietaries and through other friendly organizations within the establishment to throw business the company's way because they want the company to flower and succeed because it provides good cover for them. Shortly after the death of Nugan, Michael Hand, Yates, and CIA-connected alleged drug runner Bernie Houghton led a group of former Southeast Asia military operatives in several ransackings of Nugan Hand files. A room full of documents were shredded in the process. Inquiries following the death of Nugan found that New Hand Limited, which had been claimed to have moved $1 billion through its channels each year, was flat broke. The company was placed under the control of a bankruptcy court. With prosecution of the bank pending, in June 1980, Michael Hand and Bernie Houghton fled Australia and vanished. The only lead about the current whereabouts of Michael Hand is offered by the anonymous COM12 document. Quote, Hand is currently the most wanted individual the Australian government has its sights on. He is living in the Middle East under the protection of an Islamic group by the name of the Grey Wolves. The business of Nugan Hand was laundering money, particularly money connected to illegal activities, including the sale of drugs. Neil Evans, who was the chief representative for Nugan Hand and the major Bangkok drug terminus Chiang Mai, has stated that Nugan Hand was an intermediary between the CIA and Southeast Asian drug rings. Nugan Hand, however, was also engaged in activities that have very little to do with moving money. The letters of John Owen, hired as a representative of Nugan Hand in Southeast Asia, sent in the course of his daily operations to the bank, are filled with reports on troop movements and military activities in Cambodia and other areas. Nugan Hand was also involved in the financing of a number of CIA-connected operations in Africa, with Hand and Houghton dealing with friends like Major General Richard Secord, Rafael Chichi Quintero, and alleged Octopus stalwart Theodore Shackley. The Com-12 document links another alleged member of the Octopus to Nugan Hand. Quote, the drug proceeds wound up deposited in Nugan Hand Bank in Australia after Dr. Earl Bryan carried the bank codes out of Southeast Asia using formal diplomatic immunity. So Dr. Earl Bryan, who I would say was the most significant player in trying to appropriate the profitability of the promised software. Casolaro noted several Octopus/Nugan Hand forays in his papers, including the propping up of tiny minority white governments in Rhodesia, now Zimbabwe, and Angola. Millions of blacks in these countries were not allowed to vote, and their efforts to take control of their homelands were characterized by the CIA and establishment press as communist. Arms sales to these white minority governments were engineered by Edwin Wilson, with Bernie Houghton and Michael Hand representing Nugan Hand, which provided financing. An anonymous but intriguing document is the Kiwi Gemstone, alternately known as the Opal File. I've heard of this, and I believe Jim Keith wrote a book called The Gemstone File, something like that, which I found to be impenetrable. But I will give it another look. Provided a great deal of additional information about Nugan Hand, placing the operation within a greater international mafia context. Interesting. Excuse me. Egypt. In 1979, Edwin Wilson and Theodore Shackley formed EATSCO, the Egyptian American Transport and Services Corporation, which, according to some sources, obtained an exclusive and highly lucrative Pentagon contract to ship U.S. arms to Egypt. A highly lucrative Pentagon contract to ship U.S. arms to Egypt. Wilson also included in the partnership Richard Secord, Thomas Klein, Hussein Salem, and Eric von Marbod, at the time Deputy Director of the Defense Security Assistance Agency in the Pentagon. Secord and his partners were indicted in 1983 for $8 million in, quote, billing abuses to the government. Michael Ledeen, at the time a State Department advisor, stepped in, suggesting to U.S. Attorney E. Lawrence Barcella that the overcharged funds may have been used for the funding of black operations, thus rendering them a, quote, hands-off proposition for prosecution. I feel like that should make it worse, not better. But of course, that's what the whole Iran-Contra thing was about. Maybe this is that. Part of that. Secord retired from the Pentagon in 1983 after the EATSCO scandal, then started another company, Iransco, there you have it, with Albert Hakim in order to ship arms to Iran. Bombing of Pan Am 103. The anonymous Com-12 briefing provided a CIA connection to the bombing of Pan Am Flight 103. The following excerpt describes this connection. One of Casolaro's many mistakes was his sudden interest shortly before his death in the bombing of Pan Am Flight 103 over Lockerbie, Scotland. Killed on board the flight, among many others, were Ron Laviviere, Bill Layer, and Dan O'Connor, all CIA operatives from the Beirut station. Also killed was Matthew Gannon, the chief of station CIA Beirut office. The Toronto Star did a story by John Picton, which was right in every aspect. The commander in charge of their team was a U.S. Army intelligence officer by the name of Charles McKee, one of the individuals in charge of counterterrorist operations in the Middle East. Part of the information that was in transit with these now deceased individuals was material which could be used to destroy the, quote, enterprise. Included was the connection to the Syrian drug smuggling ring and the man by the name of Manazar al-Qassar. Qassar was deeply involved in the drugs and arms for hostages deal with Secord, North, Poindexter, Hakim, and all the others of the Black Rose Group. McKee's operation uncovered an Aquatech group, CIA deep cover operatives, which was actually the team the CIA employed to help provide cover protection, safe routing, and screening procedures for the Middle East drug running operations. Part of their duties was to cover and deflect interest from other intelligence offices from Europe and other countries, especially U.S. agencies, and in particular, another deep cover operation working somewhere within the Office of Naval Intelligence. I have heard that the Naval Intelligence is where the real deep state stuff happens. I could be wrong, but the ONI, Office of Naval Intelligence Group, is working currently to topple the, quote, enterprise and restore the intelligence community to fall back within the guidelines of their original intent. The most pertinent of their motives is a salvage operation on the U.S. Constitution and the prevention of an extreme right-wing fascist wing within the U.S. government and intelligence communities known to many as Aquarius or the Fourth Reich Order of the Rose. I can't tell if those are two different words or not. Wow. The most pertinent of their salvage operation on the U.S. Constitution and the prevention of an extreme right-wing fascist wing in the U.S. government intelligence community known as Aquarius or the Fourth Reich or the Order of the Rose. Are we to believe this, that at this time, when was this COM 12 briefing? I don't know, but has it been a long time ago if there was any? Oh, the Lockerbie bombing. Okay. West German intelligence and Mossad uncovered the fact that a bomb had been placed on board Pan Am Flight 103 by detecting a different briefcase than the one regularly used by the drug smuggler. As mentioned, McKee's team was on board the same flight with key evidence which would be devastating to the enterprise. When the bomb information was relayed to the proper sources, the reporting agencies were ordered by the CIA cover operations group to, quote, disregard. The parameters of this operation reached to the highest levels of many world governments. The Gander, Newfoundland crash is also linked, as well as the bombing of the Marine barracks in Beirut. I think that was a direct, long passage from Danny's research. Moving on, the S&L crisis and BCCI. During the Reagan administration, rules regulating the practices of savings and loan institutions were relaxed, creating an influx of speculation, not to mention outright thievery in a normally conservative financial zone. Vice President Bush took the helm of a task force on financial regulation in charge of this area of financial investment and may also have been in charge of a systematic looting of the nation's savings and loan associations. Yes, I've heard about this, by the intelligence community and associated organized crime elements. Research into 27 savings and loans failures during the 1990s, quote, evidence shows that a large percentage of these businesses had been owned by individuals with ties to the CIA, and that many of these institutions had made large and often unsecured loans to individuals linked to the CIA and organized crime. Profits accrued from the looting of the S&Ls were sometimes used in the financing of the Contra movement. Predictably, the CIA moved to block the investigation of operatives connected to the S&L and bank failures. Okay, so they were lending money to people without recourse. That means that if you don't pay back the loan, they can't go after your other assets. And they were making fees. They were generating money by making these loans, by running these banks. And then when they went bankrupt, maybe because those loans were not paid or for whatever other reason, I believe they were insured by the government. So maybe even the depositors, I'm not sure if the depositors lost money because there were S&Ls or there were caps on their accounts. But if people aren't, like this happened with that guy, he had been like the governor of New Jersey, a senator from New Jersey, the head of Goldman Sachs, and he was in, and I'll never forget the name of the company, the MF Financial. And he was going to go down. Someone will remember his name. I did so many, I've referred to him so many times that his name absolutely escapes me. He was going to go down for making a big bet with investors, small-time investors' money. And then on the way out the door, when it was circling the drain, the big bet was like on European bonds when they were having a crisis. Instead of actually taking, there was enough money to pay back those small investors, but instead of paying them back, he paid back like a big investor, JP Morgan. And I thought he was going to go to jail. And lo and behold, this or that unwound. And then the regular little people did not lose their money. And it was like no harm done. And this guy never got prosecuted. And it was just amazing. So when the regular rank and file don't lose the money, I think it's easier to brush it under the rug. So if it was FDIC insured, but at the time, the S&L crisis, I don't remember people explaining any of this, for sure not. But who's going to, Angus, will you figure out who did that? As MF Capital. He was a governor of New Jersey. Okay. One case of an S&L nosedive is instructive. Stephen Halper and Harvey D. McLean Jr. were co-workers on the 1980 Bush campaign. Halper had also been the son-in-law of alleged Octopus member Ray Klein. McLean was connected to organized crime figure Herman K. Beebe, an associate of Mafia Don Carlos Marcello. Beebe provided funding for the Palmer National Bank, which Halper and McLean founded in 1983. Palmer Bank engaged in lending to persons and organizations, providing aid to the Contras, funds which included money sent to Oliver North's Swiss bank accounts. Halper later set up the Legal Defense Fund for North. That's right, Angus, John Corzine. That is correct. So governor, senator, Goldman Sachs CEO, and did a little MF funny business and got away with it scot-free. Probably got away with it rich. Thank you very much. Another bank failure was Vision Bank Savings, owned by Robert Corson, identified as a money launderer by federal sources and also reputed to be a CIA operative. Corson's bank was involved in a number of highly lucrative land purchases and resales in 1986. These transactions, according to the Christic Institute, were made by buyers connected to the CIA and the mafia, using a portion of Manuel Noriega's cocaine profits. After the funds were transferred to Vision Bank, they were transferred as unsecured loans to a number of companies involved in the funding of the Contras and run by Richard Secord. Secord and Theodore Shackley were both on the receiving end of funds in the collapse of several S&Ls. The George Bush family also took advantage of the virtually unregulated state of the industry. Bush sons, Jeb and Neil, both made out like bandits from the collapse of S&Ls. The Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation absorbed a $4.6 million loan that Jeb Bush and Armando Codina, the leader of the right-wing Cuban American National Foundation, had defaulted on to the Broward Federal Savings and Loan in Sunrise, Florida, despite the partners' possession of posh real estate holdings in Miami. Neil Bush and two partners in Good International, what nerve these people have, Good International Inc. defaulted on $132 million in loans from Silverado Banking Savings and Loan. That was a famous one, for which Bush had served on the board of directors from 85 to 88. Bush had not disclosed his connections to the firm when arranging the loan. Neil Bush is also connected through the receipt of an $86 million loan to his company to Robert Corson and Herman Beebe Sr., the figures mentioned above, in the collapse of S&Ls. Brother Jeb is also connected to Wayne Reeder, an associate of Beebe, who defaulted on a $14 million loan from Silverado. I mean, it was just a money machine. Reeder was a partner of John Philip Nichols of alleged Octopus infamy. Yeah, he was the scary one. And was presented, well, one of them, at the Cabazon Reservation, attended by Contra leaders, bringing full circle to the Odyssey of the Octopus that Casolaro tracked. Okay, so he's looking into this one thing. Remember, Casolaro worked at a computer magazine, and he was just looking into this Promise software. But because the guys who were screwing Bill Hamilton out of his company, because they wanted the money. They didn't just want it for geopolitics. They didn't just want it for spying. They didn't just want to give it to other countries. They wanted the profits of it, and they didn't want anything to do with Bill Hamilton. And they couldn't just give him $10 million because they I don't know if it would have had, I mean, I guess they could have. I guess they could have just paid him. Oh, no, 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 no. That was the thing. They weren't buying it from him. They were just paying his contracts. That's the government had to pay him $10 million. They wanted him to go bankrupt so they could just scarf up the company because he probably wouldn't have sold it. So they really wanted it. And because those guys were doing nasty stuff like that all over the place, Casolaro found all these other things that were going on. I mean, that is big. And before the press was completely controlled, I imagine it would have made a splash. Iran-Contra made some kind of a splash, although I feel like that was payback. No, that was out of line. Like they said that the Bill Clinton impeachment was payback against the Democrats for crossing the line and actually prosecuting politicians for malfeasance. I remember that little theme, that insider stuff or whatever. Okay. Wow. The most prominent of dominoes in the collapse of CIA-linked banks was the Pakistani-owned Bank of Credit and Commerce International, BCCI. Its 400 subsidiaries shut down in 62 countries in 1991. This was the big one. BCCI was engaged in laundering money from drug profits and arms trade, providing banking for known international terrorists, and the raising, with a Z, of national treasuries. BCCI was also at hand for the National Security Council when it needed a conduit for Contra money or for other covert measures. Man. An informant stated to Time magazine that BCCI was a full-service bank. They not only financed arms deals that one government or another wanted to keep secret, they shipped the goods in their own ships, insured them with their own agency, and provided manpower and security. They worked with intelligence agencies from all the Western countries and did a lot of business with East Bloc countries. Time quoted an unnamed American State Department official who said, "When you look at the Saudi support of the Contras, ask yourself who the middleman was. There was no government-to-government connection between the Saudis and Nicaragua." I guess that's us. It was BCCI that financed and brokered, or I guess it was BCCI that financed and brokered Chinese Silkworm missiles that went to Saudi Arabia, and those were equipped with sophisticated Israeli guidance systems. When you couldn't sue direct government transfers or national banks, BCCI was there to hotwire the connections between Saudi Arabia, China, and Israel. Drugs were a major part of the revenues of the bank. According to a U.S. intelligence officer quoted by Time, if BCCI is such an embarrassment to the U.S. that forthright investigations are not being pursued, it has a lot to do with the blind eye the U.S. turned to the heroin trafficking in Pakistan. Among the clients of BCCI were Manuel Noriega, Ferdinand Marcos, Saddam Hussein, and the Palestinian terrorist Abu Nidal. When BCCI went belly up, investigators estimated that $10 billion or more was missing from the bank's coffers. $10 billion or more in 1991. Think about that. I mean, it had to have doubled twice since then. I mean, in real dollars, it would be worth at least triple that. According to U.S. investigators, the U.S. Justice Department acted to interfere in probes of bank illegalities, including the blocking of a deposition by a key witness. Manhattan District Attorney Robert Morgenthau stated, "We have had no cooperation from the Justice Department since we first asked for records in March 1990. In fact, they are impeding our investigation, and Justice Department representatives are asking witnesses not to cooperate with us." That totally reflects what Michael Riconosciuto said about when he was trying to testify before the Judiciary Committee. Researcher Sherman Skolnick discussed BCCI and the October surprise. Quote, "A source on the committee recently told me that the committee wanted to bring out the fact that there are large private business deals, not government to government, but private business deals between George Bush and former Panamanian dictator General Manuel Noriega, and between Bush and Iraqi dictator Saddam Hussein." So let me just repeat what he said. Not government to government, but private business deals between George Bush and Noriega and George Bush and Hussein. And didn't they prosecute Noriega, or is that Ortega? But they certainly took care of Hussein. These deals went through BCCI and through another bank which interfaces with BCCI, the Banca Nazionale del Lavoro. However, there's great pressure not to bring that out at the hearings. Okay, just a note on Saddam Hussein. When that was going on, it was all he's Hitler. Okay, he's Hitler. We got to get rid of him. And you could definitely find evidence that maybe he was a good guy, but I think he was done plenty of killing. I think those rumors were probably true. I don't know. I never looked into it. But even if they were true, these guys are doing business with him. They obviously didn't take him out because they were appalled by his morality. They took him out for their own reasons. Dang. So, can we have confidence in Kerry's committee? You can judge for yourself. Kerry is, along with President Bush, a member of the Skull and Bones Society at Yale University. Kerry is also chairman of the Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee, which has received campaign contributions from BCCI. Kerry himself received a $5,000 contribution from BCCI officials. The connection of BCCI to President Bill Clinton was discussed in an interview with Tom Brown, who investigated both the Mena, Arkansas drug and arms transshipment point, see Chapter 20 to come, as well as the Bank of Crooks and Criminals International, BCCI. So I got a comment or a tweet like, Monica, you don't know, like the Bush and the Clintons, they're all connected. We're getting to it. Brown mentioned Stevens Inc., stating that was an investment bank, a small investment bank. I remember it when I was working in banking. This company is one of the biggest bond sales and investment banking firms in the country. It's located right in Little Rock, Arkansas. I did not know that. And has a disproportionate influence on the government of the state of Arkansas. Back in 1977, Stevens Inc. invited some people from BCCI to come into this country, and they set up the purchase of what has now become First American Bank shares in Washington. Now, in December of 1991, the Arkansas Democrat had a report entitled, quote, Reports Link Stevens to BCCI. The story was written by Hal Brown and identifies the same Kurt Bradbury not only as a former Stevens employee, but as chairman, president, and chief executive officer of Worthen National Bank. Bradbury is quoted as saying, quote, First of all, I don't know anything about any BCCI ties, and neither do you. This is in December of 1991. Remember, it was in 1977 that Stevens Inc. invited BCCI into this country and organized the whole BCCI takeover of Clark Clifford's First American Bank shares. It just so happens Stevens Inc. owns 38% of Worthen National Bank. Now we go back to August of 1991. At that time, there was another article in the now defunct Arkansas Gazette. This article was entitled, I hate that. The title of an article is a title. It is not entitled to anything. Little Rock on the BCCI route to power. That was the title. Little Rock on the BCCI route to power. The article was written by Paul Barton. I quote this article, quote, Kurt Bradbury, then a financial analyst for Stevens Inc., and now chairman and chief executive officer of Worthen National Bank of Arkansas, provided a BCCI officer research about Financial General, including a copy of its latest report. Financial General was the parent company of the National Bank of Georgia, the bank run by Bert Lance, longtime crony of former President Jimmy Carter. Is no one innocent? I didn't think he was innocent, but sometimes he comes up as being screwed by the system, like the October surprise that we've talked about in this book that screwed over Jimmy Carter to get really Bush in the White House, in my opinion. But Jimmy Carter supposedly was a Brzezinski find. Doesn't mean he didn't. They say that the people with the biggest egos are the most vulnerable to being unwitting puppets because they never consider for a moment that they're being played. Or as Richard Booth, I had a great conversation with him yesterday, I think, where he said, those are handlers. They have handlers, and you don't necessarily know you're being handled. That purchase of Financial General and the National Bank of Georgia is what evolved into First American Bank shares, the Clark Clifford Bank in Washington. What is the Clinton connection? Worthen National Bank, headed by the aforementioned Bradbury, gave Clinton a $2.5 million line of credit for his presidential campaign. No less of an establishment mouthpiece than Time magazine has talked about the connections of BCCI to an organization called, quote, the Black Network, which, quote, functions as a global intelligence operation and a mafia-like enforcement squad operating primarily out of the bank's offices in Karachi, Pakistan. The 1,500 employee black network has used sophisticated spy equipment and techniques, along with bribery, extortion, kidnapping, and even, by some accounts, murder. One wonders if this black network might not be identical to George Bush's Black Rose and a controlling tentacle of Casolaro's Octopus. An Arab operative of the Black Network states, I was recruited by the Black Network in the early 1980s. They came to me while I was in school in the US. They spoke my language, knew all my friends, and gave me money. They told me they wanted me to join the organization and described its wealth and political power. But at first, they never said exactly what the organization did. Summary. When Danny Casolaro had come to see what he had come to see was a collusion of international crime and political power focused around a handful of men, primarily CIA operatives, who had banded together after World War II. Following the associations that Casolaro made, starting with the OSS in Albania, the trail of murder and conspiracy led from this tight net of good old boys in U.S. intelligence to a complex weave of major international criminals and power brokers, to Nazis and fascists, at least sometimes wearing the uniform of the U.S. military, to drug trafficking networks melding seamlessly into international banking, to private armies and death squads, to secret societies such as Skull and Bones and P2, to men busily engaged in looting banking institutions and national treasuries, and to the presidents and potentates of the world. These men reaped and are still reaping staggering profit, while at the same time constructing omnipresent world criminal and fascist networks, and all in the name of anti-communism. This came out when I was looking up the Vatican stuff and Gladio, and how they basically pushed socialism in South America so communism wouldn't pop up. I mean, what a trade-off. Anyway, what Danny Casolaro planned to expose was an octopus indeed, and certainly no figment of his imagination. And then I haven't been showing you this, but at the end of each chapter are a lot of references, many references. And at the end of the book, forget it. There's just, I believe these are just page after page after page of newspaper articles. I mean, just page after page. Okay, I think we have time for one more chapter. It's a short one. Plenty of time, plenty of time. Angus says, be a politician, then you can be a criminal with no repercussions. I mean, that's the scam. And I remember, I think I've mentioned this before. I just, whatever. Not great with money. Like, I just, spend what I need and hope it lasts, basically. But we start having kids and buying house, and then like we lost our like first down payment because the market fell, whatever. So I just kept thinking like, and no matter what was happening to you financially, if you were getting promoted, your tax bracket was going up. So my husband would get a raise, but hardly anything more would come home. And I just kept thinking, like, what can we do to make money? Like, what else can we do? And I was thinking, it's the taxes. What can you do to make money without taxes? And I was like, oh. I mean, obviously, I wasn't considering dealing drugs, but it's like, that's why they do the drug money. Because A, the profits are outsized because there's no competition. If there's competition, they kill you. They can't sell it in stores. And the money is totally tax-free, cash, untraceable. Like, it's amazing. And if they control the CIA, if they control the government, the policing, if they control the banking, the regulators, all of that, I mean, there's trillions of money always circling the globe. It doesn't take that much to just, put your little sieve or your little, container in the stream for a minute. If you can do it, I mean, it's really, how could they resist, I guess? Anyway, in the middle of the journey of our life, I found myself in a dark wood, having lost the straight path. A quote from Dante's Inferno, found in Danny Casolaro's notebook. And now we move on to chapter 16. Bringing back the head of the octopus. Danny Casolaro was warned from all sides to back off his investigation. Bill Hamilton noted that a number of Casolaro's contacts involved in U.S. intelligence warned him that some of the leads he was following could be fatal. Hamilton also claimed that, quote, Danny was planning to go to a particular facility in the Washington, D.C. area owned by the United States government, a facility with connections to one or more of the people who run, quote, the Octopus. I think you can assume it's a covert intelligence facility from the way that it's presented. And just going to this facility, I was warned, could get him killed. The other thing that he was doing was making inquiries over the telephone to the syndicate in Los Angeles. And those inquiries had rattled the cages of some people out there. And there was some concern that they might respond to the rattling by killing Danny. The claim that I have heard from some sources is that someone with mob responsibilities, I guess you'd call it, some person in the mob, is a member of the leadership of the Octopus. And it's someone from the Los Angeles mob. And Danny was onto it. The whereabouts of this security installation was communicated to Danny Casolaro by Robert Nichols. Casolaro had also received threats from a man associated with the matters he was investigating among the Cabazons. Now that you know this stuff, you will have to die, he quoted to a friend as one threat against his life that he linked to his investigations of Indian reservations. Wow. That's messed up. As Robert Booth Nichols passed warnings to Casolaro about Michael Riconosciuto, Riconosciuto was warning him about Nichols. Riconosciuto said that he mentioned to Nichols an attempt by the Cali cocaine cartel to stop the extradition of an alleged Colombian drug runner named Gilberto Rodriguez. Orihuela and Nichols. Gilberto Rodriguez, Orihuela, and Nichols went ballistic. Okay, I have to read that again. Riconosciuto said that he mentioned, I'm a little bit distracted because I was just thinking they said to Danny Casolaro, you have to die if you know this. Well, Jim Keith is dead, one of the authors of this book, and died in a weird way in 1999. So it's just hot. It's like burning my fingers here. Riconosciuto said that he mentioned to Nichols an attempt by the Cali cocaine cartel to stop the extradition of an alleged Colombian drug runner named Gilberto Rodriguez, Orihuela, and Nichols went ballistic. Riconosciuto later implied that Casolaro may have died for the sake of this information. But by the time I heard about it, there was nothing I could do, except to warn Danny. And I called from that day on. It was on a later Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, all the way through the weekend when they found Danny. Every day I was calling the Hamiltons asking if anybody had heard from Danny. I was frantic. Towards the end, coincidences began to enshroud Casolaro. A woman he picked up at a party surprised him with the depth of her knowledge about his research and the claim that she knew someone connected to the Octopus. He ran into a friend of Peter Videnix, the Justice Department official Riconosciuto accused of threatening him at a restaurant. The man claimed to have served in special forces and had previously worked for a company connected to Inslaw. He had been so forthcoming with information that he alarmed Casolaro's companions. Casolaro experienced queer coincidences that would feed anyone's paranoia. Quote, the Hamiltons believed that in the last days of his life, Danny Casolaro was being tailed by a man named Joseph Cuellar, an Army Special Services officer and friend of Peter Videnix. On Sunday, August 4th, Casolaro attended a pool party at real estate agent and close friend Danielle Stalling. Stalling had attempted to subdivide Casolaro's property for sale to provide him with badly needed funds. Stalling noticed Casolaro's concern over threats to his life. He convinced his brother John, who had been staying with him, to move to other quarters. That's nice. On Monday, August 5th, Casolaro's housekeeper, Olga, came by his home to find Casolaro conferring with a man in the kitchen. Olga described the man as heavy and possibly East Indian. That same day, Casolaro telephoned Bill McCoy, a retired Army CID officer living in Fairfax. They discussed the octopus, and Casolaro claimed that Time has given him the go-ahead for an article about it. He also told McCoy that Time Warner had agreed to finance his work. Both claims were later denied by the Time Warner Group. I guess after they saw both tendons cut. Casolaro also described to McCoy a round-the-world excursion in which he planned to investigate the octopus, financed by the advance money. But that also, just an observation on my part, that the Time might have been acting as a honeypot. So they know he's writing on it because Time is as deep state as you can get, right? So maybe by the time it was Time Warner, it wasn't, but they could just say, all right, write all this stuff. Here's your money. Give it to us. We own your work product. We'll give you a lot of money to own your work product and then throw it in the garbage, or waste his time for a while. Kick that can. I wouldn't be surprised. However, I guess it wasn't enough because it didn't work out that way. Casolaro wanted to visit 13 countries in 2 months, finishing the trip off with a visit to arms merchant Edwin Wilson at an Illinois prison. Casolaro noted in his papers, quote, when the advance comes, roast pig summer party. When he gets the advance, he's going to do a roast pig summer party. Is that a metaphor? He feels that he has his quarry in his literary sights and saw the main dish as an ironic statement. Yes, a roast pig. Tony Casolaro saw his brother on Monday, August 5th, and thought he looked tired. Danny said he'd been getting threatening calls in the middle of the night, ruining his sleep, adding that the calls had been going on for about 3 months. A close friend, Ben Mason, appeared at Casolaro's house around 3:30, and although Mason was anxious to go to a restaurant to eat, Casolaro retrieved 5 pages of material from a box and showed it to Mason. The first page had information on Contra arms transfers, allegedly involving Adnan Khashoggi. Adnan Khashoggi was that arms dealer. 2 more pages, and supposedly his nephew was that journalist cut to pieces in a hotel in Saudi Arabia. But I was like, that guy is definitely not primarily a journalist, in my opinion. 2 more pages were photocopies of BCCI checks for $1 million and $4 million drawn on it says Adnan, but I think it's Adnan Khashoggi and Manuker Gorbanafir accounts. These checks had been known to researchers since 1987 or earlier. Another page contained a passport photo of Hassan Ali Ibrahim Ali, said to be the manager of Citico, allegedly a front for Iraqi arms deals. From the way Casolaro spoke to Mason, it seemed that he had met Ibrahim. Doug Vaughan's research determined that the pages had come from Bob Bickle, who had gotten them from Richard Brunecki, another figure prominent in Casolaro's research, someone who had provided testimony about the October surprise. Casolaro had Mason look at an outline for the Octopus book and mentioned that he was discouraged about his agent's inability to sell the book. He said that he dreaded the idea of obtaining a new agent. In contrast to what he said to McCoy, he had received his 3rd rejection, this one from Little Brown and Company. Casolaro knew that there was a $178,000 balloon payment due on his home mortgage. He had taken at least 2 loans. Did Casolaro have a reasonable expectation that he would sell the book and receive the elusive advance? Some critics, notably David Korn in The Nation, commented on the overly dramatic purplish prose evidenced by Casolaro's notes. James Kilpatrick said associates had considered his style florid. I could see that. And his other works were virtually self-published. In his notes and drafts, however, the published fiction shows professionally spare work, suggesting that Casolaro began with rough, almost stream of consciousness drafts that he subsequently polished into something tighter. I totally believe that. I call that the vomit draft. It's how I write also. And I think I mentioned this before. Whittaker Chambers, who was a fantastic writer, may have even been the editor of Time magazine once upon a time. When he died, so his book, Witness, was fantastic, very well written. When he died, he was working on a book called Cold Friday, which his family finished, and the writing just does not hold up. Like his raw drafts is nothing like the finished product. So I'm going to give Casolaro a pass on that. I'm going to say that it was going to be a great, great book, both in style and content. His finished prose was certainly not worse than much that is published by mainstream book publishers. That's definitely true. While he knew that conspiratorial fiction a la Robert Ludlum could be lucrative for publishers, that Casolaro planned to fictionalize his view of the octopus was at odds with his eagerness to prove the truth of the sea beast's existence. Perhaps he had plans beyond the single manuscript. Danny Casolaro's investigations were never less than far-reaching. Harry V. Martin, reporting later in the Napa Sentinel, listed some of the subjects Casolaro was gathering information on during this period. Dominic and Bob Bolsano, Gemini Industries, the Papago Indian Tribe, the Menominee Indian Tribe, gold and platinum smuggling from Southeast Asia via Mexico through the Papago Reservation in New Mexico, and gold smuggling from South Vietnam, the Cabazon Indian Tribe, the murders and political intrigue connected to it, as well as the attendant issues regarding sovereign tribal land and the weapons gun traffic, the Primorate Bank of Nevada, BCCI, and other related institutions, Dr. Earl Bryan, Peter Videnix, Community Banking of Southern California, Home Savings of Seattle, Theodore Strand, Robert Booth Nichols, Department of Commerce EDA funds, the Wackenhut Corporation, former Bank of America Director Bill Jensen. I mean, does this ever end? This is the where his investigations led. The death of journalist Don Bullis, a corridor between Mexico and New Mexico, which the Drug Enforcement Agency refused to patrol, an IBM Tel Aviv connection linking the promised software to Israeli intelligence. Casolaro had also developed arcane avenues of research into Nevada's mysterious Area 51, the Human Genome Project, and even his notes reflected, perhaps as background on Michael Riconosciuto, psychedelic history, specifically Ken Kesey and Billy Hitchcock, who helped fund Timothy Leary's Millbrook Commune. If he could tie all that stuff together, I mean, that fleshes out that grand conspiracy for real. And I doubt you could divide that into Republicans and Democrats, although the promise stuff is Republicans only, in my opinion, because that's who's in office. So then it went into the Clinton era, and without skipping a beat, seems like to me, and he was a Democrat. These topics have preoccupied the computer nets and writings of those interested in conspiracy theories before and since Casolaro became their cyberfolk hero. They certainly could have been fodder for a writing career. The volume of the accumulation alone suggested that Casolaro had plans for the future with or without the magical advance. In fact, he had cast his original proposal as a series of articles and a book. Casolaro did have a mild form of multiple sclerosis, an often debilitating disease fatal to a small percentage of its sufferers. It may have caused him moments of disorientation, but he did not feel strongly enough about it to have it treated, and he did not discuss it with people close to him. In fact, most did not know about it until after Casolaro's autopsy. The one talk he did have about MS with friend and nursing teacher Anne Marie Winfield ended with an assurance from her that it probably was not serious, and her observance that Casolaro did not seem concerned or suicidal over it. I don't know if I think these guys knew that with both of his tendons cut, the official story can't be true, no matter what his state of mind was. They go on to write, if he was suicidal, his behavior contradicted it. He visited the office of his insurance agent and made a payment on his house insurance. According to one report, a review of his financial records indicated that he had made a July mortgage payment of about $2,000 and still had $2,700 in his bank account. On Tuesday, August 6th, Casolaro finished what he was working on, having worked steadily at the typewriter since the previous day. His housekeeper, Olga, assisted him in packing a black leather bag and watched him pack papers into a briefcase. When she lifted the briefcase, she found it heavy. Casolaro told her, I have all my papers. Wish me luck. I'll see you in a couple of days. He hugged Olga and she crossed her fingers for good luck. Suicide? Not in a million years, his cousin and sometime drinking partner Jim Galtieri would later insist. Danny wasn't a coward. He wasn't afraid. He would have never done that. Danny had a regular girlfriend. He was a good person. He was a sweetheart who liked to laugh a lot. Danny was a pretty happy-go-lucky guy. He was very happy with his life. I would call Danny very inquisitive. Writing was a great passion in his life. He was writing a book that would blow everyone's mind in terms of revelations about the government and all the sinister things that were going on. This reminds me of Maury Terry and his book, Ultimate Evil, which is a is just the tiniest thread. His whole entire book is just, could be one paragraph in the Danny Casolaro stuff, but it was about the satanic backstory to the Son of Sam murders. Before leaving the house, Casolaro received a call from Ben Mason. Danny was upbeat, Mason said. He was enthusiastic about his source in West Virginia. Mason had called to discuss Casolaro's financial situation, a topic Casolaro had also discussed with another friend, Art Weinfield. Both Mason and Weinfield had concurred with Casolaro on the importance of getting that advance, and Casolaro told Mason that if it were not forthcoming, he would have had to borrow from his family as he had done many times in the past. Jim Galtieri affirmed this last point. Knowing how close the family was, they would have never left Danny in the lurch for money. Very close-knit family. Shortly before his trip to Martinsburg, Casolaro called Virginia McCullough. They had often discussed the idea that members of the government might have been engaging in drug running in order to fund guns. Casolaro told McCullough, "You know, Virginia, I'm becoming a believer." McCullough said that Casolaro sounded distressed because he had to face the truth. At the same time, McCullough recalled he sounded very upbeat. When he came back, he would have justice right where he wanted them in the Inslaw matter, because that was his primary concern. Casolaro had also called Albro Lundy Jr. of Beverly Hills approximately a week before his death. Lundy recounted that Casolaro related that he was close to finding out who was in control of the Octopus and made a new connection to the issue of missing Vietnam POWs and MIAs. One of the reasons Casolaro went to Martinsburg was to interview for a second time one or more members of the staff of Senator Robert Byrd. The interview had been planned for Friday night, August 9th, 1991. Casolaro had mentioned to the Hamiltons that one chapter of the Octopus book would be about Senator Byrd. He believed the secrets that would crack the Inslaw case resided with members of Byrd's staff. He also told Bill Turner that he was going to meet with two of Byrd's staff, one of whom was related to Mrs. Peter Videnix. Reporter Sarah McClendon said that Casolaro had spoken with Mr. and Mrs. Peter Videnix. Mrs. Videnix is Byrd's chief of staff in his Washington office and had two relatives working on Byrd's staff. Bill Hamilton also claimed that the Martinsburg stay was supposed to involve a meeting with Videnix and Earl Bryan. He had been researching this thing for a long time and was very excited about the information he was finally getting, said Ben Mason. I doubt they had any information. I don't think he was ever meant to meet Earl Bryan. He was in good spirits and very excited about the source he was going to see in West Virginia. There's no way in the world that he would have killed himself. He had been digging into stuff for months and getting nowhere, Casolaro's brother Tony said in a telephone interview. Then suddenly he said he had his big breakthrough, some source he had. Danny had also told his brother that if, quote, an accident befell him, not to believe it. According to Bill McCoy, Casolaro made one more call on August 5th to Bob Bickle, a Texas oil engineer and former Customs Bureau informant, and told him that he was going to bring back the head of the Octopus. Then Danny departed for Martinsburg. And that was that. I wonder if we should read this interesting thing about the Human Genome Project. Let me just see. All right, let me read this if you don't mind. It's one of the footnotes. I hardly read the footnotes, but I'm curious about this Human Genome Project. And then we're going to wrap it up and come back next week with Chapter 17, Final Hours. Maybe I can do this in 8 episodes. Wouldn't that be cute? And I see that there are like epilogues, but well, I don't know. I don't know if I'll be able to finish it in one more, but let's read this. Let's read this footnote. A note from Arthur Pilata to Casolaro attached to an unidentified article in Casolaro's news clippings file on the Human Genome Project and its first director, James Watson, read, Danny, cannot think of one project so massive and comparable to the, quote, man in the moon. The $3 billion Human Genome Organization, HUGO, worked to decode the human genetic structure. Its director, James Watson, co-discoverer with Francis Crick of DNA, resigned over conflict of interest questions regarding his stock ownership in companies like Eli Lilly, Amgen Inc., and OnGene Science, charges that Watson bitterly denied. Moral and ethical issues of genetic testing and genetic degradation haunt genome research, but its potential to cure disease is enormous, as is the potential for profit from medical treatments resulting from it. Casolaro's clippings collection included stories on the European Economic Community's delay of the start of its own human genome project for the sake of the ethics issue. It also included an article on research at Howard Hughes Medical Institute that gave symptoms of arthritis to a rat through the insertion on a human gene and the isolation of cancer and gender identification genes. The Human Genome Project also discovered genes for cystic fibrosis and Fragile X syndrome, responsible for many forms of mental retardation. Casolaro's interest along these lines may have coincided with an interest in Creutzfeldt-Jakob or mad cow disease and other bacterial research work done by subcontractors to Wackenhut, like the Stormont Laboratories of Woodbine, California. In October 92, Hugo issued a report recommending the collection of genetic material from 722 isolates of historic interest, IHIs, or indigenous ethnic people whose numbers are diminishing, and leave sample DNA of each community with its regional institution or a national government. Another purpose was to locate and secure, what are they planning to do with that? Another purpose was to locate and secure patents on unique genes that could be used to fight disease. See, I worry about that because they're patenting genes that belong to people, and the people are not the people owning the patents, and I don't know if you even know about it. Access to an IHI's complete genetic makeup means it's theoretically possible to devise cheap and targeted biological weapons trained solely on that community. That's what they were doing in South Africa, reported the Northern California independent newspaper Community Endeavor on June 15, 1993. Human rights violations against indigenous people by their own governments and or governments within their regions is a major cause of their physical extinction. This and similar issues may have attracted Casolaro's interest to the Human Genome Project, but he may also have been more interested in possible treatment for his own undiagnosed case of multiple sclerosis. Well, how could he be interested in something that was undiagnosed? All right. Well, I'm not going to read the rest of these. Well, this one's about POWs. One more footnote. A posting on the All Conspiracy News Group from March 11th, 92 included the story of Albro Lundry III, who testified before a congressional committee on Vietnam POWs and MIAs that his father, an MIA airman, was pictured in photographs that the committee sought to authenticate. Lundry claimed to have received a call from Casolaro in August, a week prior to his death, in which Casolaro claimed to be only 1 or 2 steps away from uncovering the men in charge. According to this account, Casolaro had said that BCCI, INSLAW, Iran-Contra, and the cover-up of POW MIA was all related. Man, oh man. No wonder that guy's accordion folder is missing. All right. Until next time, when we start chapter 17, Final Hours, and I continue to bend back the book that now is worth hundreds of dollars. Dang. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you. I will have a great night, Angus. And to you all, I'll talk to you next time. This is Monica Perez.